Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my neighbor built an illegal hidden tunnel underneath my farm property to take care of his illegal business. I ended up calling the police on them and they were in for a surprise. Here is what happened. And the title story starts like this. My name is David and this is how I got into a fight with my neighbor shortly after moving in. I should first explain that I inherited the farmhouse exactly 1 year ago after my grandma tragically passed away. I was already living here for a few months before her death as she needed help with the harvests and daily chores. My grandma had always been a bit of a recluse, which I thought was out of habit initially, but now I'm not so sure. From where we live, we have only one neighbor, so you would have thought you would want to be on good terms with them, right? Well, instead we don't see or talk to them at all. When I asked my grandma why, she said, "Don't get involved with them." She was a smart lady and I wish I had listened. With just me living on the farm, I found it very quiet and an isolating place, peaceful at times but also spooky to a degree. No doubt I had seen too many horror films about how much serial killer types adore remote places for their dirty work. This was not helped by the fact that the sensor lights around the farm, such as the house and the perimeter fence, would flash on and off throughout the night with no immediate reason why. I chalked it up to the local wildlife being mischievous and thought no more about it. When I was about to start on my chores early the next morning, I stumbled upon something particularly odd. It was a footprint. I immediately brushed it off as being my own until I compared it and realized the sizes didn't match. Concerned that my farm might be the next target of some local hoodlums or an organized burglary, I stopped my work to visit the hardware store. By the evening I had bought and installed numerous surveillance cameras which I stationed at various points around the property. I did not try to hide them, more interested in the deterrent of the act than catching the act itself. But if it helped, then great. Feeling a little more relaxed now than I had done this morning, I managed to put aside my anxiety as I fell asleep watching TV. I failed to notice the sensor light still flashing out the window behind me. I'm glad I was not fully aware of it at the time though, as when I checked the security footage the next morning, I made a shocking discovery. Someone was actually sneaking onto my farm at night, but it was no random thief, it was the neighbor. As I followed them between each camera, I found they walked straight past my house and into a blind spot on the other edge of my property. I immediately went outside to look for footprints but found no decent trail, searching with no luck as to their reason or whereabouts. At least knowing more now than I did yesterday was helpful. I wasn't just scared but confused and angry. I decided to pay them a visit. The neighbor must have been asleep when I knocked because their initial attitude was anything but friendly. They were also wearing an odd jumble of mismatching socks and shorts under their robes. I didn't know how best to introduce the topic, so I simply asked it bluntly to see if they were on my property at night. They denied it, acting just as confused by the accusations as I was when I saw them on the camera. When I mentioned I had proof from the cameras, they were outraged, accusing me of using them to spy on him. This was the first time I had spoken to my neighbor since moving in, and I was clearly leaving a horrible first impression. I did not even have time to properly ask his name before he shut the door on me. Whether I was right about what I saw or not, it looked like it had started a grudge. Walking home, I thought if the neighbor wouldn't be honest, then I would have to look into it myself, turning into a prime detective of a new mystery. I followed their route to the best I could remember, stopping at the point they disappeared from the cameras, and now came the hard part. An hour passed before I finally found a footprint again, which stopped abruptly between trees. As I gave up and walked on my foot, I hit something empty and metal beneath me. I cleared back the debris to find it was a small door built into the floor itself. As hard as I tried, I couldn't open it either. It seemed to be new and quite sturdy. After my attempts, I found a small keyhole for which I only knew one person who could have the key. Perhaps now the neighbor would be willing to speak a little bit more. Returning to the neighbor, I found them somewhat more put together the second visit. They stood with their back to me as they grilled some sausages over a sizzling barbecue basin. When I said hi, they replied with a slight annoyance to their voice, their focus still fixed on the cooking. Learning from last time, I asked whether they knew anything about a weird door or tunnel on their property, rather than accusing them of trespass again. This seemed to work. Their attention immediately shifted as they left the grill to turn to me in conflicted seriousness. His face was a mixture of emotions. I was waiting to see whether his dice would land on anger, confusion or shock this time. Instead though, he seemed fine, if maybe a little twitchy. He explained that there were some around that he knew about vaguely. When I pressed about it if one was near my farm, he nodded, saying that it was his. Confused, I asked why a tunnel on my farm was his, but he assured me he owned that part of the land. Doubtful, I asked him to show his deeds, which I expected would only net an aggressive response, but he actually did get them for me. Plain as day, he was right. His deed had marked out a chunk of my property where I found it. It was odd, but he did actually own it, or so it looked. That afternoon I decided to head into town for my groceries, taking the chance to also speak to some people I knew about the history of the area. They were not at all surprised by my discovery. In fact, they were quite astonished. They explained that tunnels ran all under here for miles upon miles, dated far back as the old war days, with entrances popping up everywhere. And it looked like I now had one on my farm, but what my neighbor was doing and why they needed that tunnel I still did not know. Resolved to find out for myself, I returned to the tunnel entrance shortly after dinner, taking with me a toolkit to bust my way in. With the fading light, I knew I didn't have much time until my neighbor visited again, but didn't think what I needed to do would take long. By now, its location is firmly fixed in my mind, so I have no trouble finding the tunnel again, despite the natural or unnatural attempts to hide it have been. First, I tried to pick the lock with a small chisel, only to find my chisel was bending as easy as butter. With subtlety aside, I slammed at it with my crowbar as sparks flew from the impact. The noise must have echoed far as well, though all I could hear now was ringing in my ears. While I heaved from the exertion, I was about to quit when I finally managed to wedge the tip under the panel, finding enough grip to start and pry it open. Suddenly, someone yells behind me, causing me to fumble and fall on my rear. Now standing over me, silhouetted against weak moonlight, was my neighbor. He was furious that I was on his property and seemingly tried to break into his tunnel. I told him what I heard about them in town and said I just wanted to look. He told me to leave and not tell anyone else this is here. I didn't fully understand his seriousness until he pulled out a handgun out from his jacket pocket. I quickly did as he said and ran back to my farm. I was not so curious that I would stake my life on it with my crazy neighbor in the middle of the night. That didn't mean I wouldn't find out what was in there one way or another though. Now that I knew he was down there, after no doubt walking through my property again, I reached the telephone and called the police. I hesitated slightly. If they didn't arrest him, I would be putting my life in danger, but if I stayed quiet, it's not like I felt safe here either. 10 minutes later, a covert cop car rolled up the driveway and I quietly led them back to the tunnel entrance. When the neighbor did not reappear for some time, I offered myself as bait to draw him out to the surface, calling him as if I were about to follow him down there to look around. Just as planned, a very angry neighbor came crawling out soon after, and I hid to avoid the coming confrontation. When it was safe to move closer, the cops surrounded him, preventing the neighbor's escape by forest or by tunnel. He moved his gun between the officers, threatening a shootout before the overwhelming odds made him change his mind, that and a taser to the back. The cops called in reinforcements as the experts began to tape off the crime scene. I stuck around to find out what was going on, as it was my property. I was later informed that a massive amount of drugs had been stored in the tunnel underground, linking the man back to a drug empire that they had been chasing for a while. The trial was very short. My neighbor was sentenced to 20 years behind bars for things like dealing with illegal substances and falsifying land deeds. It turns out my good-for-nothing neighbor had been using that tunnel for quite some time, though his history with my grandma was still hazy. I cannot see her being involved in the business, but so close to her property, I wondered if she really knew what was going on. I guess now I would never know. After the neighbor's arrest, their house was put up as collateral on the fines he presumably couldn't pay. I guess with a life sentence in jail you wouldn't need that house anyway. I hope my new neighbors would be a little better, but honestly, it would be hard to find anyone much worse. After the cops cleared it, I was also left with ownership of the tunnel, as well as the land the neighbor faked that he owned. I did not know what I wanted to do with it, but to avoid any incidents in the near future, I decided best to lock and hide it again, just for now. And yeah guys, if you have enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment if you want to support me. Thank you so much. And the next one is a customer revenge story. Sadly, I did not give the petty revenge, I just witnessed it firsthand. So I was working on an ATM drive-thru. I'm a simple residential and commercial electrician, so I don't deal with power lines, meters, transformers and fuses and whatnot. On this particular day of work, we were expected to get the power company out to terminate our building to the power grid. And well, occasionally to make a safe connection to the transformer, the power company will turn off the power to the entire transformer, sometimes needing to turn off other buildings connected. A courtesy call was made to all buildings said power was going to be shut off for 10 minutes. And well, everyone was alright with that, everyone except this entitled Karen. When entitled Karen heard this, she threw an absolute fit. She came to the job site and instantly targeted anyone she could see. Anyone in this case meaning me. Entitled Karen, you cannot turn off my power. Me, I'm not turning off your power, the line guys are. Karen, you cannot do that. I run a very important business and I will not let you turn off my power. Me looking over at her very empty boutique store. Ma'am, there's not anything I can do. Talk to that guy over there, the lineman, and see what you can do. Entitled Karen puffs and walks over to the lineman, instant yelling ensues. Eventually, she leaves back to her little shop, smug like she just won. Power guy just keeps doing his thing. This is where the pettiness comes into play. The lineman terminated the connection by the meter while everything was still live. Damn impressive if you ask me. I would chicken out if I had to do that. After he was done and checked everything, he goes over to the transformer and pulls the fuses, killing Karen's building. Then he just sat there for 10 minutes doing absolutely nothing. Eventually, he reconnects the fuses and comes over to talk to me. Lineman, hey man, you're all good, everything is live. Me, hell yeah man, thanks. And hey, since you did the termination live, why did you pull the fuses after? Lineman looks smug as crap and he goes, that Karen pissed me off because she thought I was gonna turn off her power. I wasn't, until she told me I couldn't. And yeah, right, stars, that's exactly how you have to deal with entitled Karen business owners. And the next one is titled, Sometimes the Customer Can Be Right. I used to work at a place that sold burgers and ice cream. I quit because the manager had a favoritism problem, but that's a different story. So I was a cook and our restaurant was unique in the fact that the kitchen was openly visible to the customers as we had a big counter that we called out people's orders and delivered food at. This was a magnet for entitled people. Let's just say no one came back to the counter to compliment the food. People would complain about the food to my face often. And then one day, after a couple of months of starting work, an older couple came in and ordered a single order of small cheese curds. Technically, we were supposed to level off a small measuring cup of curds before cooking them, but I found the small cup for the curds way too small, so I usually just eyeballed it. I saw this couple had only ordered a small to split between the two of them, so I, being nice, benevolent minimum wage burger flipper gave them some extra. I called the couple's number and they came to the counter. The lady, who will be called Karen, looking at the basket of curds like it was something vile and said, "Is this the small size?" I explained to her that it wasn't quite a large one, but I did top her off with a little extra. Karen looked at me like I had spit in the food and said, "Actually, we would like this to go now." Like she didn't want to be in the restaurant anymore? I put the food in a to-go bag and as the couple was leaving, she sneered at me with her voice oozing sarcasm. "Have a great night." I told my coworker what happened and that I was confused, and he told me that sometimes people get offended when given more food than they ordered, like they were being pitied or something. I shrugged it off and continued work as usual. Enter the petty revenge. A few months later, I was working a late shift when I saw a single order of cheese curds pop up on the screen. I looked into the dining area and sure enough, it was the same couple. So I did what any good employee would do. I filled the order. I took the measuring cup and scooped the curds in and then proceeded to level it off perfectly. I took extra care in making sure that it was exactly a small cheese curd. Once cooked, they were only like 7 cheese curds to split between 2 people. I called out the order number and gave them the tray with my best smile. Enjoy! The couple looked at the pitiful amount of curds in the basket. Karen gave a sheepish "thanks" and they took the tray to a table. I watched for the next few minutes as the couple finished the tray very quickly and just sort of sat there for a while after. I giggled to myself the whole time. I know it's not that glamorous or interesting, but I think it was pretty petty and it felt good to stand up for myself a bit. After all, the customer is always right. And honestly guys, I don't know what sort of problems some people have, but if I get free extra food at a restaurant, I definitely don't complain. Especially if you get a free chicken nugget or something at McDonald's, that's pretty much the best feeling possible. Who would complain about that, honestly? The next one is titled, I can hear my upstairs neighbor snore through the floor as if he was laying in bed next to me. I told this story last night to some friends and they suggested I post it here, so here it is. I live on the second floor of a 3-floor apartment building. The apartments above and below me are both laid out exactly the same as mine. Currently, the downstairs apartment is vacant and the landlord is planning on renovating it slowly over the next few months to have it ready for summer. The upstairs neighbor moved in about 3 months ago now, after the previous couple moved out. I never once heard any excessive noise from the previous tenants. I have lived here for almost 3 years, but the tenants above and below me over this time have all stayed for a 1-year lease only and then moved on. I tend to stay up until about 11:30/12 most nights before I go to bed, and I always sleep with a fan on in my room for white noise. For the last 3 months, when I get in bed and turn on my fan, I can still hear the new neighbor snoring. It is so loud, I'm surprised the light fixture on my ceiling does not vibrate. When I roll over and try to fall asleep, the noise is so loud that I could compare it to sleeping with someone with untreated sleep apnea on a mattress on the floor next to you. I spent the first month distressed and exhausted at the lack of sleep. Halfway through the second month, I started being passive-aggressive and taping brochures for sleep apnea clinics on their mailbox and got myself a nice pair of earplugs. And I can still hear him snore over the fan and with the earplugs. At this point I am struggling to keep it together as I am a light sleeper, but what can I do? He is in a whole other apartment. I consider moving my bed to main part of my apartment, but I really don't want to sleep in the same room I cook and my cat poops. Then one night when I cannot fall asleep, I decide to try the good old reliable method of tiring myself enough to pass out and grab my magic wand and plug it in. That is when inspiration hit me. I turned that magic massage wand on high speed and laid it between my solid bed frame and the wall, so it made an insanely loud rumbling noise that was absolutely unavoidable to hear upstairs. After a few minutes, I heard the neighbor get out of bed and stomp around wondering what the sound could be. I left it the way it was for about 15 minutes, and when I turned it off, I could not hear anything upstairs. I fell asleep peacefully and easily for the first time since he moved in. For the last few weeks, every night when I start to get ready for bed, I do this. I use the noise to wake the neighbor for 15 minutes while I prepare for bed and then turn it off and fall asleep within minutes without hearing the snoring. If I ever encounter him in person and he asks if I know what the noise is, I intend to tell him it is the old hot water system in the building. The next one is titled, Impatient Neighbor Makes My Mom Cut Down Trees, so Mom Buys a Cheap Fence so 3-year-old me can run around in the backyard faces the ugly side of the fence toward the neighbor. This was 13 years ago and my mom had some trees in the backyard that were dead and some that provided the neighbor's yard with shade. The neighbor wanted the dead ones taken down and Mom told her that she had called the landscaping company and set up an appointment, which she did. Anyone who's ever tried to get landscaping people to come look at your yard knows that kind of thing takes a while. It was not moving fast enough for the neighbor, so she called the Department of Housing, who told Mom to take down the trees. So Mom decided to cut down all the trees, not just the ones that the neighbor didn't like, including the ones that provided the neighbor's yard with some shade and that she did like. After Mom wanted to put up a fence so the 3-year-old me could run around and play in the yard. Instead of buying a nice fence, Mom opted to buy the cheapest fence possible. One side looked okay, but the other side was ugly as hell. When the guy came to put up the fence, Mom told him that she wanted the ugly side facing our neighbor, and when the guy asked if she was worried about pissing off the neighbor, her reply was a resounding nope. The neighbor of course complained, but since it was on our property, she could not do anything about it. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.